Rain stitched the town together that night. Thin silver lines sewing the streets to the river to the bridge to the diner at the bend where my life divided cleanly into before and after. The neon open sign flickered like a tired eyelid. Inside, the coffee tasted like burnt truth. I sat in the corner booth because that's where I always sat, back to the wall, eyes on the door, a habit I'd learned in a younger, wilder life I never told my daughter about. The door swung open on a gust of wet cold and exhaust. Boots. Leather. The sound turned all the conversations in the diner down a notch. 6 riders came in, road dark and rain slick, each one carrying the weather with him like a second coat. At their head was the one they called Rook, tall, deliberate, every motion like a measured word. He took off his helmet and the room saw his face. Not handsome, exactly, but truthful, like a scar that healed right. His hair was black and damp. His eyes were the color of new asphalt after a summer storm. He found my booth without looking, as if he'd known where I'd be. "Mr. Hale," he said, nodding once. "Thanks for agreeing to talk." "I didn't agree," I said. "I said if you were fool enough to come to my town and sit in the open, I'd hear what you had to say." He smiled, quick and almost private, like he kept better smiles for someone else. "Fair." The waitress brought them coffee without asking. She set mine down with the care you give a loaded thing. Outside, their bikes ticked as heat met rain. The sound made me think of my shop's old compressor, the way it cooled down at night when the work was finally done. The way a heart slows when it stops remembering to be angry. Rook sat across from me, hands folded on the table, rings dull with road grime. "I came to ask for your blessing," he said. "I want to marry your daughter." There it was. Truth, like a bolt on a seized thread, refusing to turn gentle. "No," I said. He didn't flinch. "You haven't heard the reasons." "I've heard the engines," I said. "I've seen your patches. I've watched 6 of you roll through a 4-way like you on the crossroads. That's reason enough for me." He took it like a man who'd been hit before. "With respect, sir, we stop twice as often as we go. People only remember the times we go. You're not marrying my daughter." He accepted that sentence, set it down between us, and did not argue with it right away. He glanced toward the window. The rain had thickened to a sheet, a hotel curtain drawn across the parking lot. "She told me to talk to you," he said finally. "Said you were a decent man having a hard year." I felt something in my chest go tight and mean. "Leave Lily out of your mouth." "I can't," he said, simple as a wrench. "She's the only reason I'm breathing right." The other riders had spread themselves along the counter, quiet as knives in a drawer. One of them, older, gray at the temples, patch that said patches because irony survives every war, watched me with the eyes of a man who'd raised a son that didn't make a home. I leaned in. "You're black dogs." Rook's mouth quirked. "Black dogs?" He corrected gently, like the spelling mattered. "The name's older than we are. Started as a charity run for the K-9 rescue upstate. We kept the badge." "You kept more than the badge," I said. He nodded. "We kept each other." He didn't try to sell me a lie about what a motorcycle club is or isn't. He didn't dress the leather up in church clothes. He let it sit. That made it worse and somehow better. "I've seen what roads take," I said. "I buried a friend who loved velocity more than breath. I watched another kill a kid because he thought stopping at a red light was for people who didn't have places to be. I won't put Lily near that." He listened like he'd come for exactly this verdict. When he spoke again, his voice went softer, not weaker. "What if I told you we stop at red, sir? Not always. We're not saints, but we try. What if I told you that in my father's house, a man was measured by whether he held a door, not by what patch rode his back? I'd say your father isn't the one asking to marry her." He smiled again, that private one. "He's in the ground. If he'd lived, he'd ask for me." I could feel the waitress and the storm and the whole town listening. The diner had gone into that tense stillness small communities get when they think they're about to hear a man say the thing that will end him or save him. I could feel my wife's ghost listening too, May with flour on her wrists and laughter in the corners of her mouth. May who had been gone 5 years and who still turned on the radio in my head at midnight to our song. She'd loved machines and music, my wife. She'd loved anything that made a good sound when it finally worked right. "My answer stands," I said. No. Something passed behind Rook's eyes. Pain, then acceptance, then something I couldn't name. He stood, gentle with the chair. Then I'll ask you to let me keep seeing her, he said. Proper like, in daylight, in places with witnesses, if it makes you feel better. I'll sit in sunlight and drink sweet tea and help you rotate tires until your hands cramp. You can tell me every single thing I've done wrong in my life, and I'll tell you every single thing I'll do right from here on. You talk like a man who thinks people can be new, I said. People can be better, he said. I'm not foolish enough to believe the other. They left with the rain. One by one, the bikes rolled into the river night and were swallowed. I sat until the coffee got cold enough to remember it's self-water. The waitress said, Sam, and I said, don't, and she didn't. I went home to an empty house and a front room full of unpaid bills leaning toward each other like men planning a crime. The bank's letters were the worst. Heavy paper, urgent type, reminders that a shop that used to make enough to keep a man decent had become something vultures circled. The town had slowed since the plant closed. Folks were fixing things in their own driveways, letting brakes go one more month, then one more. I'd sold my old Ford to keep the lights on at Hale Auto and Machine, and still the lights had begun to think about leaving me. In the morning, Lily came by with a bag of groceries and a grin she'd inherited from her mother's side, sly and sunlit. He came to see you, she said before she'd even shut the door. I'm aware, I said, and I said what needed saying. She set the bag on the counter and took my face in her hands the way her mother used to do when she was about to tell me something I'd hate now and thank her for later. Dad, she said, he's not what you think. I think he's a man who can talk pretty inside a storm. He's a man who sat in a hospital for 3 days with his brother and then held his sister-in-law's hand while she signed the papers because the ventilator was the only thing breathing, she said, fast and sudden like pulling a bandage. He didn't run. He didn't rage. He carried the bills out one by one and sold his bike to pay the first month, then started over because the hospital didn't stop needing money, just because the person it was for had stopped needing air. I hated that story because it sounded like the truth you hand someone right before you ask them for the permission you know you don't deserve but you'll die without anyway. He rides with a club, I said. Yeah, she said. A club that took every dollar they'd saved for some big ride and handed it to a widow with a baby who wasn't even theirs. A club that rebuilt a porch after a tornado for a woman who spit on the ground when they showed up because she thought leather meant her house would turn to whiskey. I poured coffee. I didn't need to have something to do with my hands. May would have loved the boy because he makes good sentences, I said. Lily's eyes softened at her mother's name. Mom would have loved him because he listens. The week went on like a bolt that wouldn't thread right. I saw Rook on the edge of my days. At the farmer's market lifting boxes for old men whose sons moved away, at the arcade helping a kid find a mother lost in a slot machine she couldn't afford to love, at my shop door not crossing the threshold because I hadn't told him he could. He nodded every time. He never pushed. A man can get used to hating something he only knows from far away. It's harder close up, where the details betray you. Then came Tuesday, the day the developer came. His name was Quinn, and he wore his hair like he'd gone to a school where men learned the difference between rich and wealthy and chose the second. He parked across 2 spaces in a black car that looked like money had tried to make itself invisible and failed. He walked into my shop with a smile he practiced on mirrors. Mr. Hale, he said, holding out a hand I didn't take. I represent Silverline Properties. I'm here about the parcel. The parcel, I said, as if I didn't know he meant my father's shop. My shop, the building where May and I kissed against the bolt bins while the radio played a song that still lived under my ribs. We've made several offers, he said. We're prepared to make one more. Very generous, given the building's condition. I looked around at the scuffed concrete, the lift that sighed when a job went up, the bright red toolbox with a top drawer that stuck unless you knew to lift it just so. Condition's fine, I said. He glanced at the sagging awning, the door that scraped. Of course, he said. Be that as it may, the town would benefit greatly from our development. Upscale apartments, boutiques, reimagining. He set a fat envelope on the counter. This is good for 30 days. After that, well, there are other levers. I'm fresh out of 30 days, I said. And levers. He leaned in, voice dropping to the kind of intimate threat men with HOA power are born knowing. You're behind on taxes. The bank is impatient. My client is very patient. But patience isn't infinite. There's a sheriff's auction for liens on a dozen properties next month. I'd hate to see your father's legacy hammered away to the highest bidder to make room for a cocktail bar called Wrench. I felt my hands ask for something to break and told them no. Get out of my shop, I said. He did, smiling all the way to his car. When a man like that leaves a sentence unfinished, you don't need to hear the last word to know it rhymed with ruin. 2 nights later, someone cut my back lock and painted a dog's head on the cinder block wall. Crown above it, teeth too big for its mouth, a bad imitation of the dog's emblem. Petty, sloppy, loud. It wasn't about accuracy. It was about blame. The next morning, a patrol car idled at my curb. Officer Mendez looked tired. Sam, she said, I know you didn't do that, and I know they didn't either. But if I can figure out the difference, so can the folks writing letters to the editor. I don't have time to worry what editors think, I said. You have to worry what judges think, she said quietly, and what fire inspectors think. Be careful. By afternoon, the back door had been pried and a shelf had gone over. Bolts everywhere, like 1,000 problems scattering. I stood in the wreckage and thought about how a man can lose everything slowly and still be surprised when it's gone. That's when I heard the bikes. Not many. 3, maybe 4. The sound rolled up and stopped out front. The bell over my door rang. Rook stepped in and did not cross the oil line on the floor because he'd figured out I didn't like men in dirty boots past that point. We heard, he said. We came to help. I didn't call you. I didn't ask who did, he said. Behind him, the older one, Patches, had a broom and a 5-gallon bucket. A woman I hadn't seen before, Patch that said Dixie, tied a bandana over her hair and started gathering scattered bolts into coffee cans like she was saving someone's language. Another man, Mouse, by the Patch, set up a work light my shop didn't own and tilted it so I could see the damage without seeing too much. I started. You need friends, Dixie said without looking up. Happens to everyone eventually. They were careful with my anger. They moved quiet, asking where things went, listening when I said a drawer had a trick, a shelf had a tilt. They put the world back in an order I recognized. At the end, Patches set a small wrapped box on my counter and stepped back like it might be the last time I'd let him put something on my counter. What's that? I asked. Something from Lily, Rook said. She asked me to bring it. My daughter's handwriting on the card. For luck. Don't be mad. Say thank you and then love me anyway. Ed. Inside was a brass key on a leather fob stamped Hail. The cut was strange, double-sided, teeth too deep for any lock in my shop. It's for later, Rook said, as if he'd heard the question my face asked. When you're ready. I wanted to throw all of them out and lock the door they'd fixed and go back to being a man who only knew how to say no. Instead, I nodded once. Thanks, I said, which cost me more pride than any bill had. They left without asking for coffee or payment. On the way out, Rook paused at the threshold and looked back at the shop like a church he wasn't sure would ever welcome him, but he loved anyway. You're a good mechanic, he said. You make things hum. You talk like a poet, I said. That's just because I don't know enough about carburetors, he said, and went into the afternoon. That night, the rain quit pretending it knew how to be gentle. The river rose, and the county app sent out one of those warnings that read like a prayer written by a lawyer. I went down to the shop because I didn't trust sandbags and saints to do a proper job. In the middle of the night, standing in water to my shins, I saw headlights cutting the dark. The dogs. Not many. Men with families home in beds. Men with bosses who think rain means time and a half, but enough. They formed a chain and hauled. They made a wall of pallets and tarps and stubbornness. At one point, Rook waded past me carrying the compressor like it didn't weigh what it weighed. Will you want this, sir? He said, as if I outranked him. Up on the bench, I said before I remembered I didn't want to be the kind of man who gave him orders. By dawn, the river decided it wasn't my enemy. We stood on the curb watching it sulk back into its banks, steaming like an animal denied. I owe you, I said. Don't make it money, Rook said. What else is there? Time, he said. A chance. A table where I can drink coffee and listen to you tell me about Lily learning to ride a bike on that stretch of parking lot, and how she scraped her knee and didn't cry because her mother said, "We don't cry for learning." Tell me that story so I can carry it with me the next time I want to ride fast and angry. I could feel the answer forming. No, no, no. But there are times a man recognizes that his favorite word has become a cage. "I'll think about it," I said. "You just did," he said gently, and went to roll up a hose. The developer's threats turned into letters, then filings. There was a date. The sheriff's sale went on the calendar. I sold what I could. I worked 12 hours and watched the week eat them like candy. I thought about calling my brother and didn't because pride is a ladder you keep climbing until the rungs snap. I thought about selling May's piano and felt her hand stop mine. The night before the sale, I locked the shop and went home to a house that smelled like memory and dust warmed by a furnace that would need replacing in a year I might not get to. On the kitchen table sat a note in Lily's hand. "Dad, tomorrow morning, open the shop like normal. Don't be late." With a blue shirt Mom liked. Love, L. I slept badly. I dreamed of engines that wouldn't start and men who wouldn't leave and water folding my life up like a shirt I wouldn't get to wear again. At 7 sharp, I unlocked Hale Auto and Machine. The bell rang the way it's always rung, slightly sharp, like the metal wanted to be a different note. I walked into the bay and stopped. The floor was clean. The machines were covered with drop cloths. In the middle of the space, on 2 sawhorses, sat a long wooden crate the color of old whiskey. The words stenciled on the side were a kind of spell that pulled me 10 years backward. Hale, Lodge and Turner, 12 by 36 precision engine lathe. I backed up like a man stepping from a rattlesnake. My hands found the crate without my permission. The top was screwed down and new. A driver lay on the bench like someone had arranged for me to make a good first noise. "Open it," Lily said from the doorway. She stood with her hair in a braid like her mother wore when she was doing work too important for loose strands. Behind her, the dogs filed in, quiet, respectful, almost solemn. Rook last, like a man doesn't need to lead every parade. "What did you do?" I asked, but the words came out flat because my heart had already started naming parts one hadn't touched yet. "Cross slide. Compound rest. 40-inch center distance. Gap bed. Open it," Lily said again, and the command in her voice was maze. I drove the first screw like a prayer. The wood came up easy. The smell was oil and cosmoline, and the promise that something heavy will cut true. When we peeled the crate apart, there it was, the lathe I had been dreaming about since 1989 when Mr. Turner at the machine shop 2 towns let me take a finish pass on a shaft, and the curl came off like a ribbon from a gift to a better version of myself. New, not a scratch. Painted that deep green that tells you a thing was made by people who like to look at their work when they're done. I couldn't talk for a heartbeat that lasted a year. Mouse handed me an envelope. My name, block letters. Inside, a folded sheaf of paper. Bill of sale, shipping receipt, warranty. Paid in full. Paid by Black Dogs MC, Lily Hale, donors, see attached list. There were 100 names. Some I knew, some I didn't. Folks I'd fix for free. Folks who paid me in deer meat when cash was shy. Folks who'd sworn they'd never let a biker change the tire on their mind. "Ow?" I asked. Rook rubbed the back of his neck like a boy caught doing something noble. "Saw the auction notice," he said. "Checked your books." He glanced at Lily. "With permission." I looked at my daughter, and she shrugged. I told them what it would take to keep the shop, to make it work. Not just a Band-Aid, Dad. A reason for people to keep choosing you. "We could have just brought a check," Rook said. "But a thing like a shop, money disappears. A machine stays. It makes other things possible." He gestured to the crate, the lathe that looked like a promise if you were the kind of man who still believed in those. "You taught half this town that a broken thing deserves patience. Let this one teach the rest what you can do. It's not enough to stop a sale," I said, because pride wanted to win one more argument. "That's page 2. Patches said and held up the deed. "Not the shops. The lots. The dirt under my father's initials. The paper that said a man could stand in a place and know the map agreed with his feet. Your tax lien went up yesterday afternoon," Dixie said. "We bought it at 3. Cost less than the drinks those suits drop when they say celebration through their teeth. Paid the arrears this morning at 8:10. The clerk cried. I think she likes you. We can hold it, Rook said. For a year. Maybe two. But papers are papers. They're coming back to you if you want them. We didn't buy you a job, Sam. We bought you a chance to keep being the man you already are. Lily put her hand on the lady's headstock like it was a living thing. Lily put her hand on the lady's headstock like it was a living thing. They bought me my mother's miracle, she said. A place the town could go when it can't find its shape. Something in me that had been clenched since May's last breath let go all at once. I sat down on a crate and cried in front of people who wore leather because leather doesn't mind salt. When I was done, I stood. I walked around the lathe twice like a man, making sure the animal would let him on. I ran my hand along the ways. Ground like a lie that finally decided to tell the truth. Who am I to a thing like this? I said. You're the man who will make it sing, Rook said. I looked at him, at the club behind him, at my daughter beside me, at the deed, at the long steel bed that would hold a future if my hands remembered how to deserve it. Yes, I said. The word surprised me with its own lightness. Then I said it again, because some words are better repeated. Yes. Lily laughed and cried at the same time, which is how a heart sounds when it finally gets its way after losing longer than it wants to count. She threw her arms around me. Over her shoulder, Rook stood very still, the way a man does when he's in a church, and the thing he prayed for walked in wearing boots. Sir, he said, careful. Yes, I said to him, too. You can court my daughter. You can marry her if she keeps saying the same word to you she's saying to me. He didn't whoop. He didn't grab or flex. He closed his eyes and breathed once like he'd been underwater a long time and someone had finally remembered to call his name from the shore. The wedding was small because that's how we do it here when joy is a private animal that startles at noise. They set up chairs in the shop bay and ran string lights and pushed the lathe back like a godfather watching from the corner. May's photo sat on the bench in a frame Lily made from an old license plate, hail cut and bent to cradle the glass. The dogs wore clean vests. The patches looked like crests of a house that had decided to be loyal to whoever needed loyalty next. Rook's mother cried when she saw Lily come down the aisle wearing her hair in that braid. Patches read a poem he pretended he found on the internet, but he'd written himself. Dixie sang, low and sweet, the kind of voice that puts a hand on your shoulder when your knees don't know if they can hold you. After, Quinn came by because men like him can't resist a scene that won't include them. He stood at the edge of the lot in a suit that cost more than the first car I bought. He waited for me to come to him. I didn't. He came to me. Congratulations, he said, the word trying to pretend it didn't taste like vinegar. It appears you found alternative financing. I found family, I said. He smiled thin. We'll see who owns this block in 6 months. I already do, I said, and turned away. He didn't come back. Not that season. Not the next. Men without roots hate watching trees deepen. In the months that followed, the shop learned a new sound. The lathe's first cut sang out on a Tuesday when the sun remembered how to be July. Steel curled off the tool post in bright, thin vows. Word got around that Sam Hale could turn a thing to within a whisper and make it fit where the factory said nothing would fit again. Farmers came with shafts and couplers. The mill sent out work the big city shops didn't want because it paid better to fix than replace. A boy named Eli stood at my elbow until I handed him the dial, and then he never left. Some mornings I'd make coffee and find a pie on the stoop because the town paid what it could how it could. Some nights the dogs would roll through a closing and sit quiet, drinking from paper cups because we don't make trouble for Officer Mendez, telling stories about roads that didn't kill them and people who made it worth having survived. Rook never took Lily away from Sundays at my table. He learned to like the way she put too much pepper in the eggs and never once asked her to ride when the rain said no. When he kissed my daughter, he did it with his hat in his hands, like the moment deserved manners. I kept the deed in the top drawer of the desk, under the warranty and the first curl that lathe ever made. Sometimes late, when the shop was still and the river was in a mood to brag, I'd open the drawer and touch the paper lightly because touching a good thing is a way to keep it honest. Every once in a while, a stranger would stop and look at the mural on the cinder block wall out back. It's there still. The dog's head someone painted to start a fight. Next to it, Dixie came back one Sunday with 3 cans of paint and a brush, and turned the crown into a halo and the teeth into a grin, and added a wrench like a scepter, and beneath it a line of script in her neat hand. We fix what we love. The day Lily told me she was pregnant, the shop lights flickered at the same moment the lathe finished a pass and came to a stop with a little sigh like a benediction. I put my hand on that green paint and said my wife's name softly, and for once it felt like she was in the room and would stay a minute. We called the baby May when she arrived because some names need another chance to hear themselves out loud. On nights when the rain sews the town back together, when the diner's neon is a pulse and the bridge looks like an old scar, sometimes 6 bikes will roll past and not stop. They don't need to. I watch from the doorway, rag in my hand, coffee on the step. Rook will lift 2 fingers off the bar, that quiet salute. I'll nod, because men like us exchange small signs instead of speeches, and sometimes those are worth more. When people ask me why I said yes, why I let a man with a patch and a history put his hand in my family and keep it there, I tell them the truth. Because they bought me something nobody buys anymore. Not a machine, though I bless its bolts. Not a deed, though I sleep lighter over that paper than I ever did over a gun. They bought me time. They bought me dignity. They bought me a way to be the man my wife married, even after death tried to teach me a different song. What they bought for me made me say yes. But who they were when they weren't buying anything. That's why the yes keeps earning itself. Sometimes a town learns a new sound and decides to like it. Sometimes a father learns a new kind of son and decides to keep him. Sometimes a daughter points at a life and says, "Look, Dad," and what you see is not a duplex and not a biker and not a threat, but a future pulling into your lot with its signal on and its music low. On those nights when the river minds its manners and the lathe is quiet and the baby is sleeping and Lily laughs from the kitchen like her mother went and taught her the best parts of herself, I walk out back to the wall and read those words again under the haloed dog. We fix what we love. I touch the paint. I go inside. I lock the door of a shop that is mine. And I thank the road and the rain and the men who came from both with their hands.